Creativity is often misunderstood as a spontaneous burst of inspiration or a talent reserved for artists. In this episode of Coaching Revealed, Dr. Zorana Pringle offers a research-backed reframing of creativity as a skillful, emotional, and social process, one that unfolds over time and can be intentionally developed. Drawing on her work at Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and background in personality and social psychology, Dr. Pringle explains that creativity is defined by two essential components: originality and effectiveness. Whether in everyday life, professional problem solving, or leadership, creativity requires navigating uncertainty, emotional complexity, and ongoing refinement. Whether in everyday life, professional problem solving, or leadership, creativity requires navigating uncertainty, emotional complexity, and ongoing refinement. A central theme of our conversation with Dr. Zorana Pringle is the inseparability of thinking and feeling. Dr. Pringle shares how different emotional states support different phases of creativity. Positive, energized moods can help broaden thinking and generate ideas quickly, while more subdued or pessimistic moods are better suited for critical evaluation, refinement, and improvement. Rather than seeing emotions as obstacles, she emphasizes learning to work with our emotions. From a leadership and coaching perspective, Dr. Pringle highlights the importance of psychological safety, trust, and expectations. Leaders who communicate belief in their team's creative capacity help build creative confidence, leading to more innovative behavior. Coaches, in turn, can support clients by demystifying the creative process, emphasizing its emotional dimensions, and helping leaders create environments where creativity can thrive. The episode concludes with reflections on Dr. Pringle's book, The Creativity Choice, which explores psychological barriers to creativity, the nature of the creative process, and how individuals and organizations can make creativity more reliable over time. Creativity, as Dr. Pringle makes clear, isn't about waiting for inspiration. It's about learning how to work skillfully with our emotions, relationships, and environments to bring meaningful ideas to life. Thank you for tuning into Coaching Revealed. And now, our conversation with Dr. Zorana Pringle. All right, hello everyone, and welcome to Coaching Revealed. I'm one of your hosts, Austin Matzelle. I'm joined with my co-host today, Emily Terrani, and we are interviewing Dr. Zorana Ivcevic Pringle. And we are so excited to have Dr. Zorana here in the studio with us today as we get into the topic of creativity and what that can look like for coaches and individuals. So, Zorana, thank you so much for being here. It's really good to see you in the studio.
Thank you for having me.
Just to go ahead and get us started, let's kind of expand this idea of what creativity is. I'd love to know, what are some things that you are currently doing for yourself, for your own creativity?
I do a lot of writing. I got interested in science communication, and that became a big area of creativity for me.
How did you get interested in creativity research, and especially the emotional side of creativity? Can you walk us through that journey?
Actually, it started very early on. I was an undergrad looking for research topic for a thesis, and I was reading everything. At the time, I did not know that is actually how ideas happen, by being very broad and inclusive and just absorbing things. And I ran across research from the first golden era of creativity studies from the 1960s, and this statement by a prominent researcher, Frank Barron, who said that creative individuals are in the same time more sane and more insane than the general population. At the time, I did not know what that meant, but I was very clear that I was interested in it because I wanted to know what it meant. And I had a sense that it means encompassing dualities, encompassing complexity. And later on, I realized that has to do with the emotional side of creativity, of how do we cope with challenges and difficulties so that in the same time we can have vulnerabilities, psychological vulnerabilities, but also have the resilience to respond to them.
Wow. That's awesome. And it's such an interesting quote. I've never heard that before. So once were exposed to this, what was your first step into getting involved in the research side of it?
I got involved in research very early on in my undergraduate studies, and then I got a PhD in personality and social psychology. But I am interested in creativity studies. And so I define my area of study as creativity studies, which is by definition interdisciplinary. So I have done research and I have published in education studies, in organizational behavior, and in traditional areas of personality and cognitive psychology, because to truly understand creativity, we have to know different parts of the person and their social environment.
When you're, working in the space of creativity research, what's unique right now about creativity research, or what are creativity researchers learning about? What are they discovering? What kind of problems are you and other people in the field looking at?
It's a very broad field. So people are looking at creativity relevant questions from different angles. So there are people in cognitive science and cognitive neuroscience looking at fine detail of how creative thinking happens and what are its neural bases. And that's very important. My research does not deal with that because neuroscientific research is really limited in the time span that it can examine. If we are going to observe what happens in the brain, we have to study very brief creative tasks. And I am interested in what happens in the real world as people are going about their everyday lives. I'm very much interested in everyday creativity that manifests in our relationships and our daily activities. And I'm also interested in professional creativity, what we do in our work lives, how do we approach them, what are we able to accomplish. And for that, we really have to broaden our perspective and look at not just how we think in the moment, but also how that thinking changes through time, through long process of working on creative projects that can take from hours to days to months, sometimes years, and how our social environment influences us.
I'm listening to all the different factors you're referencing that can change what an individual's relationship with their creativity is. And it sounds like a lot to be able to take in and consider. And so, as you are looking at both relational creativity and professional creativity, is there maybe a working definition that you use in this space? And maybe what is a way that people can be thinking about their relationship with the concept of creativity?
That is a great question, and that is a great question to anchor our discussion. What is creativity? Sometimes people have this idea that it's very difficult to define what creativity is. But it turns out that scientists have a standard definition. It's actually called the standard definition of creativity because we all agree on what it is. So creativity is something that is in the same time original and effective. What that something is, I have purposefully used that vague word. It can take different forms depending on the domain of our work or expression of creativity. So if we are talking about something that happens in everyday life, that may take a form of, we are now in the season of giving. It can be taking a form of a unique gift for somebody who is close to us, a unique gift, but also something that they would truly love. They're putting together those criteria of originality and effectiveness. In our work lives, it could be working with your clients as coaches and finding new ways to frame problems and approach them so that you can create true change and growth in your working relationship.
I feel like most of us have like a layperson understanding of creativity, and you just spoke to the breadth of creativity. How in research, do you define the essence of the components that make something creative? Because I would imagine that's a bit difficult to define.
You have hinted in your question actually at an answer that scientists have settled on. So you said that we have a sense of what creativity is. It turns out that that sense is hard to put into words often, but it tends to be pretty valid. And noticing that, Teresa Amabile, who is a professor at the Harvard Business School and one of the greats in creativity research, noticed it and created a way of assessing creativity that she called the consensual assessment technique. And what that means is that a group of judges evaluates something that could potentially be considered creative independently from one another. And if they show consensus, and they tend to show consensus, that we can trust that that product or performance truly is creative.
Very fascinating. And then what are traits that people exhibit when they're creative?
There is one trait that is at the core of, from what we can tell, every form of creativity: openness to experience. Openness to experience is a broad personality trait that describes people who are imaginative, who like to play with new ideas, have discussions of new topics, stretch their interests, have broad interests, and allow for flexibility and for something new and different.
There's a really big laundry list of options for people to be able to touch on their creativity. It makes it interesting to try to consider what type of language one would use to understand a feeling that at times can be so tricky to capture, I guess, with just words. And that seems to be something you've alluded to a little bit. To continue to try to refine some language around creativity, I'm wondering, are there things that people maybe oftentimes misunderstand about creativity? Are there some common misconceptions about what it is or what it isn't?
There are quite a few misconceptions about creativity. One is, and probably the most common one, that creativity is related to the arts. And that creativity almost is equated with the arts. When, at a cocktail party, when you chat with somebody and the first question ends up being, "Oh, what do you do?" When I share that I study creativity, I often get an answer, "Oh, I am not creative." And almost in the same breath, "I cannot draw," or "I am not very artistic." That gene, somebody in my family got that gene, which lots of assumptions there. First one, that, you either have it or you do not have it, which is an incorrect assumption, that creativity is equated with the arts. Sometimes that gets a little bit broadened up to creative industries, and the term that is used is creatives to denote some people who are creative as opposed to everybody else who is not. Often hearing that somebody got the creativity gene, there's this assumption that not very much can be done about it. So those are the biggest myths about creativity. But then there are others that are very common, like in a recent study across 6 different countries, truly covering the world, from the US to Poland to China to Georgia, really looking at what people think are the attributes of creativity. And about 70% of people across these countries said that creativity is the highest and the greatest when we have full freedom of our actions. And it turns out it is quite the opposite. When we have full freedom of our actions, just because how the mind works, we go to what is first accessible in our minds. And those are pretty commonplace thoughts and ideas. When we are faced with constraints and challenges, we are pushed to think in more unconventional ways and moved by the very nature of the task towards something that ends up being more original.
Ready to advance your coaching practice? Join the Institute of Coaching and tap into the world's leading resource for coaching science and professional development. With over 4,000 members across 130 countries, the IOC offers invaluable networking opportunities with an elite global coaching community and innovative learning to broaden your knowledge and keep you at the forefront of coaching best practices. Engage in cutting-edge learning events with world-renowned coaching scholars, from webinars and seminars to discussion groups, research projects, and more. Try any membership free for 30 days. Use promo code IOC Podcast and visit instituteofcoaching.org/join to get started.
It sounds like you're also alluding to, in that instance, that part of what makes creativity rewarding or what makes creativity satisfying is the ability to be confronted with a problem and come up to a solution to that problem.
Indeed. Creativity, one of the ways creativity manifests itself is in problem solving, by addressing challenges that we are presented, something that we are given, like we are given a problem in school, we are given a problem at work, we address it in new, original, and effective ways. That is not the only way how creativity happens. There is a lot of discovery and identifying new problems and finding what potential opportunities might be, and then embarking in a process of, in the same time, constructing these problems and framing them in different ways and creating new solutions.
So in this, web of creating solutions from problems and the challenge of that, does your research specifically on the impact of emotions on creativity, does that come into play with this element of the challenge of creativity?
Yes. So creativity is challenging. Creativity is hard, and we don't always acknowledge that. And when we experience something as challenging, it is a fundamentally an emotional experience. Now, sometimes people create a dichotomy between thinking and feeling. But as coaches very well know, we are integral humans. You cannot leave the emotions at the doorstep because you cannot leave part of you at the doorstep. You can try to suppress them, but if you try to suppress them, they are going to come through in unexpected and usually unhelpful ways. What is less obvious to people is that we can use emotions to further our thinking, further our action, and make it more effective towards our goals. And that is where most of my research is focused on.
It's interesting because as you were speaking, I was thinking of the artistic, creative, well-known people. And the first thing that came to mind is they come across as being very open and connection with their emotion. And I know you said before, openness is huge, but that also can be openness to thinking. It's almost like being creative about your thinking, right? Being creative about being creative. So what have you seen in your research about how thinking and feeling are more interconnected, and how someone can work on developing openness to either to, I guess, channel creativity?
This question is at the core of my research. Thinking and feeling cannot be separated. So what we have learned in the last 40 years of emotion science is that there are different kinds of moods and emotional experiences that are related to different kinds of thinking and make them more successful. So when we are in positive, energized moods, like being happy and joyful, we are better able to very quickly come up with new ideas and a lot of ideas. Our thinking becomes broader and we do not become concerned with, oh, how is this going to sound? So we can engage more fully with things that in other times we would immediately censor. But then in other times when we are feeling more subdued, emotions that are maybe more pessimistic in nature, we are better at critical thinking. And we can find everything that is wrong with something we have worked on before. Now, if you think of creativity as I do, as not just coming up with ideas, but also making them come to life, taking ideas and building them into performances or products, then you know very obviously that you need to generate ideas, you need to develop them, you need to be critical about them in order to find where their strengths are, find where their weaknesses are, and improve of them for that maximal effect. So you need information from all of these different emotions. You can put it to use. To be very, very practical about this, how could you put it to use? I can share a personal example. So I am not a morning person, and that is, if you know me, a severe understatement. I am grumpy in the morning. Until 10 a.m., everything is wrong with the world. But it turns out I can use that. So first thing in the morning, what I do is I work on those tasks that require critical thinking. And I read what I have written the night before when I was in a more expansive and more upbeat mood. And I find what can be improved. I find things that don't quite work, where transitions are not transitioning, they're not smooth, or I find that something is not clear. And I can find all of those points that are points that we can build on. At other times, when I'm in a more upbeat mood, which for me is really in the later afternoons or in the evenings, I can come up with new ideas. I can put down those things that may be breaking conventions, or they can be lists of things that could be possibilities for the future.
I have so many thoughts and comments. This is so fascinating. So the things that are really coming up, in a coaching context, a lot of times it's what you're calling out is being self-aware of your creative moments and how that also ties into your mood of, what are the best times of days to do certain things. So identifying when are you in a more creative, mode and mood. So that was one thought. And then my kind of related, but also separate thought was, it's so interesting that the research, I studied human development and got a master in psychology. And that was the first time that I was presented with the research and information of how the purpose of positive mood is deeply tied to creativity, that we have positive mood to expand us and to be creative and problem solve in these alternative ways. And that on the flip side, which is what you were speaking to too, is there is also a purpose to the more negative moods, and that also serves a purpose. Like creativity might not always be the best, tool or skill for us to use. So I'll just leave it there. Those were the two thoughts I had as you were sharing.
I agree with you, and it is at different times we are working on different kinds of tasks that require different kinds of thinking. I actually think that we need both expansive thinking and critical thinking for creativity that is not reduced to coming up with ideas, but it's something that brings ideas to life. So it's not that positive moods are good for creativity and negative moods are good for something else. It is all of these kinds of thinking are relevant for creativity in the long run when we are building something that is going to take time and that is going to be a complex product.
In a way, you're describing a way to develop the human being as this kind of engine for being aware of the emotions that we're experiencing and the energy state that we're in, and then having an ability to make decisions of what kinds of things are going to be better utilizations of your energy, of your emotions at this time. Like what types of creativity might work well if you are in a more positive mood, or if you're in a more negative mood. There are things that you could be doing that could give you a sense of purpose or development during that time in that state. Is that a good way to think about it, or is there something else you would add?
It is a very good way of thinking about it. Having awareness of our emotional states and being able to identify them in a very granular way, beyond just I'm feeling good, I am not feeling good. Often when people are asked, how are you feeling? The most common answer is busy, which is not actually a feeling. It's a description of your to-do list, or feeling stressed, because in our culture, we value being stressed. It is a sign that we are doing a lot and that we are pushing and that we are being ambitious. So we value stress, even though we sometimes talk about it as a barrier. This very broad labeling of emotions is not particularly helpful, because it's not going to provide suggestions of what we might do next or do better. If instead of saying that we are feeling stressed, we say we are feeling frustrated, then we have a hint of what might be good actions to take. So if we are feeling frustrated, it means that there is an obstacle towards our goals. What we have been doing so far has not been successful. So we have hints now. We have a hint that we shouldn't proceed in the same way that we have done before, because what we have been doing is not successful. So now we have to find a way to get over that obstacle, or underneath it, or sideways. And we need to find new ways to approach it.
Just to be as direct as possible, maybe, with the research that you're doing right now, to our audience, people who are in the coaching space, so they're helping other people, individuals, with their development in the workplace or in their personal lives, or maybe the work that can be done within our own personal lives too. What are some things that you would want to share with people who are interested in developing this skill set of utilizing creativity in this way with their emotions and overall being?
The first lesson is, well, you can do something about it. These are all skills. These are all skills that can be built. And then the first step in building emotion skills is expanding our emotion vocabularies, expanding ways we describe those feelings, so we don't end up falling into how are you feeling? Well, I'm feeling stressed, or I'm feeling meh, or I am feeling good, but drilling it more in to better understand the experience. And that experience can then give us hints of how to approach situations. There are workshops, there are tools that can help develop these skills. I highly suggest to people to invest in them, because it comes back multiply. It comes back in terms of emotional well-being and health, and it comes back in terms of better effectiveness in those tasks that we wish to complete, that we pursue, that are challenges and ways we pursue personal growth and professional growth.
How can we leverage, the feeling and the thinking to evolve that growth through the lens of creativity?
So one thing that we can do is by learning how different feelings relate to different kinds of thinking. As I shared, more positive and energized feelings are good for quick bursts of idea generation. Research shows that brainstorming, especially quick brainstorming, when you are in a meeting and you go, ideas, now you have 3 minutes, really benefits from positive energized moods. Now, more we work on a problem and more we consider ideas, then that benefit of positive mood is not there anymore. So positive moods only help in the very first push towards ideas, that it opens up our thinking and we can throw out something unusual. At other times, when we are in more pessimistic moods, we can use them to look through our to-do list and say, I have these 5 things on my to-do list that require me to really focus on improving something, adding detail to it, adding nuance to it. In those kinds of moods, we are going to be most successful in that. Of course, this doesn't always work. We have to very much acknowledge that sometimes our emotions become overwhelming. This is not to say that if you only do this, everything is going to work in 100% of time. When emotions get in the way, when they become overwhelming, what we need to do is something else. We need to manage them and regulate our emotions. And when we are regulating our emotions, we are doing something, using strategies that will nudge our emotions in a more desirable direction. We are not going to regulate emotions from from extremely frustrated to joyful. When I say nudge or change their course, it's going to be just enough so that we are able to open up our thinking or think more effectively. But it might not be a transformation that is instantaneous and that is dramatic.
What's the role of other people in this? How do they impact our creativity?
Just like there isn't a single emotion that is good for creativity uniquely, it depends on a kind of task along the path of developing your ideas and doing something with them, building them up. The same thing is the case when it comes to influence of others on your creative process. In the early stages of the creative process, when you're exploring different perspectives, when you are looking at new ideas and fresh approaches, it is particularly helpful to reach out to those people who are essentially at the outskirts of your social networks. Think of those individuals who you are not talking to on a daily or weekly basis. Because you don't often talk, chances are you have different perspectives, you are coming from different backgrounds, and you have, to a certain extent, different expertise. And that is beneficial to the process of coming up with new ideas and seeing something in different light. However, at those times when you're already committed to an idea, now you're working on deepening it, developing it, building it into performances or products. At those times, you want to reach out to people who are close to you, who are your strong relationships. Those can be relationships with friends and family who are going to give emotional support and say, yes, and you can, that was a great idea. Have you considered something else? Those can be relationships with coaches, people who have come to learn how you are thinking and who can take that as a starting point of deepening and developing that potential that is inherent in ideas.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier with creativity is the ability for creativity to address things like dualities. For coaches, how is maybe a way that we could be helping clients understand how to navigate dualities with creativity as a tool?
That is a beautiful question because it is reflecting the nature of creativity, as it is not a single thing. It is not a single way of thinking, and it is not a single kind of task. It is embodying, broadening up and narrowing down in an almost dance-like manner. And in order to do it most effectively, you need to do different levels of diagnosis. You need to be aware of what's going on within you and in your environment as we are labeling our emotional experiences. You also have to be aware of where you are in the creative process. And is this a time that calls for more open thinking and broadening up your perspectives, or a time to narrow it down? And that is not as straightforward as it might seem. It takes some nuance. We are conditioned in our society to talk a lot about productivity, to talk about maximizing, to talk about not losing time. And some of the requirements of creative work at first might seem like waste of time. They are not, but only if we keep in mind the longer term perspective. A key component of the creative process is constructing problems, looking at problems from different angles, really questioning what is the nature of the work we are doing, and spending actually more time on that process than the process of coming up with ideas. Ideas, it's a paradox of creativity, end up emerging from the process of not focusing on ideas, but on process of focusing on nature of problems.
I really love that term, paradox of creativity. I think it's a great way for people to be taking in the concept and the ways that we can be thinking about this idea. I'm assuming that you may be talking about this and many other things in your book. We would love to learn a little bit more about what is the book that you developed, the creativity choice, and what are some of the additional materials that exist in that writing that we're not going to be able to necessarily talk about today in a 1 hour conversation.
The creativity choice wants to guide you through three big sets of questions. The first one is noticing that we have more ideas than we actually develop and do something with. And it asks, what are the barriers? What are specifically psychological barriers that sometimes come in the way and don't allow us to pursue those ideas and do something with them? And there I discuss, that's the first part of the book, and I discuss issues related to uncertainty and experience of psychological risks. And also I discuss creative confidence and doubt, the ebb and flow of confidence and doubt in the creative process. The second part of the book is saying, okay, now you have made that first choice. You have embarked on the process of doing something with your idea, but you need the know-how. You need to understand the nature of the creative process in order to do it in the best possible way. And there I talk about the tools of problem finding, from identification of problems and opportunities to examining them and exploring them in different ways. And also discuss emotional tools, using our emotions to harness their power, that connection between thinking and feeling, to optimize our work at different times. And then what to do when our emotions really get the best of us and become overwhelming. How can we approach the process of regulating emotions? And I spend a lot of time, a whole chapter on what can you do when you experience a creative block? And finally, the third part of the book is saying, congratulations, now you have done something creative. You have developed that performance or a product. You have something in your hands, but also you don't want to be one-hit wonder. How do you make creativity reliable? And that is a topic for the social side of creativity.
In that realm of the social side of creativity, I'm thinking about the workplace and other forms of groups and communities. How does creativity get impacted by a workplace or by a group of people?
The first thing we think of, it comes to mind when we say the social side of creativity, is collaboration and teamwork. Those are very common in the world of work today. But that is not the only way that creativity is social. Even if you are doing something that as an activity itself is solitary, I wrote a book. I was the only one writing a book. No ghosts involved. As an activity, it's solitary. It is still social in its very core because ideas do not come out of a vacuum. And they are developed with interactions with communities. My intellectual community of scholars in creativity studies, community of science communicators. Those are the influences, intellectual influences. What you are also hinting at are more social and emotional influences. If we think of the world of work as an ecosystem, the health of that ecosystem really influences what we are able to do, whether we are able to fully develop our potential and show our potential in that environment. And there, the most fundamental issue is one of psychological safety. It's whether we are in an environment at work where we can have a basic assumption that we will encounter respect, that our ideas will not be unduly harshly criticized. We will be able to share them without fear of retaliation or fear of losing privileges or fear of insert what those fears could be in real life environments.
I'm seeing it twofold, especially tied to leadership in the workplace, where you have someone that is tuned into their creativity and you need to ensure that they're safe to breathe that creativity, experience it, live it, apply it. And then there's also the side of leadership where you have individuals that, as you were saying earlier in our conversation, don't realize that they have creativity because they don't think of themselves in those traditional capacities being artistic. But how can a leader help support those individuals to realize that they do have the capacity to be creative, that everybody does, and how they can apply it and expand on it in their role?
Leaders have a great role to play in creating the environment and the climate for creativity and innovation at work. They are leading by example. One of the ways they are leading is making people understand their capacities. Wonderful research has been done to show that when leaders have an expectation and trust that their team members can show creativity and they come to expect it from them, instead of being something that creates more stress in their team members, it becomes a permission. And it becomes a piece of information that people interpret in a way of, if my supervisor, boss, leader expects this, I must be able to do it. I have a permission to do it. So it ends up building individual creative confidence. Studies that have looked through time how leader expectations influence their team members have found that leaders who say, I trust that you can creatively solve problems, end up having workers who believe that they can. And as a consequence of that, engage more fully in the creative process and end up making creative contributions.
That's really helpful. What is the coach's role in this?
It really depends on where your client, your leader client is in their understanding of the creative process. So I think that the first step is to share about the nature of the creative process. Share that creativity is not just for those people who are so-called creatives or in roles that traditionally are expected to show creativity, but it is something that can happen in virtually any role within an organization. Share with your leader clients that putting trust into your team members' capacity for creativity is going to develop and nudge their own creative confidence. And I would say the third thing that coaches can stress with their leader clients is the importance of the emotional side of creativity and the role that leaders have in creating that emotional ecosystem. To give you an example from research that I have conducted at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, we have done a survey across all industries in the United States. So they were representing the industries in the proportions that they happen in the economy. And we could really have a snapshot of what people are thinking and feeling and doing. More than 14,000 participants. And we have asked workers to tell us about how their supervisors, their most immediate leaders, are acting in relation to emotions. Are they showing that they understand and recognize the effects of different decisions that they make for their teams? Do they acknowledge when they realize somebody is overwhelmed? Do they help their team members address the challenges at work and solve those problems that create big emotions? And we have found that when leaders act in these ways, these emotional, intelligent ways, their workers are more likely to perceive their work as enabling them to grow and develop. They have more positive experiences at work. And as a result, they engage in more creative and innovative behavior. On the other side, when leaders do not act in these ways, workers are telling us not that they are not feeling good at work, they are telling us that they are feeling angry. They are experiencing a whole host of emotions related to anger, from being irritated and aggravated to being mad.
I want to thank you so much, Zorana, for sharing all of your knowledge and your wisdom with us and all the research that you've done in this space on creativity. It feels very impactful for me, and I know for all of our listeners as well. For an initial wrap-up question, I'd love to know, how are you feeling in terms of your own creative energy today, right now?
I am just getting in the time of day when I have ideas flowing. And earlier this morning, I was in my critical mode working on a big analysis paper, and we were able to really hash out some points of disagreement. So I was benefiting from different states at different times of day.
Sounds productive and enjoyable and very purposeful. So for anyone listening in today, I'm wondering, how would people be able to stay in touch with you or see what you're up to?
I am reachable at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. Through email is the best way of find me, and my personal website where you can get all the information about the book, and also subscribe to free Substack newsletter.
Thank you, Zorana. So nice to have you here with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you so much. And to all of our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Coaching Revealed. We'll be back next time.